Hello, in today's FAQ about the GMAT, we are going to look at the structure of the GMAT test. It's the most basic question that most of us would have. What is the structure of the GMAT exam? We are going to look at the following questions underneath this. What are the sections in the GMAT? What is the duration of the entire exam? What is the duration of each section of the exam? In addition to this, what we are going to be doing is we'll also look at what is actually to be done as a student or as a test taker when you're preparing for each of these sections, and what is likely to be a good and a competitive score for each section. Right. The first section of the GMAT is the Analytical Writing Assessment section. It lasts a duration of 30 minutes. In this AWA section, you're expected to write an essay. This is followed by the Integrated Reasoning section. This section was introduced in the GMAT in July 2012. The duration of this section is 30 minutes. At the end of these two half-an-hour sessions, you get an option to take a break for 8 minutes. Note one thing about these time durations. These time durations are watertight time durations in the GMAT. So for instance, if you save about 6 minutes in the AWA section, you manage to complete it in 24 minutes, and you move on to the next section, GMAT test will not permit you to utilize that 6 minutes that you have saved there in the next section. The integrated reasoning is going to last 30 minutes, irrespective of whether you used all 30 for AWA or you used lesser than 30. Similarly, if you are not completed the AWA section by the 30th minute, you cannot borrow 5 minutes from integrated reasoning. So each of these sections are watertight sections. The first section, AWA, is the only section where you write something. The integrated reasoning section is a multiple choice question type section. The third section is the quantitative reasoning. It's for a duration of 1 hour and 15 minutes. At the end of this section too, you can take an optional break for 8 minutes. And finally, you have the verbal section. That's for a duration of 75 minutes too. So the test ends with the verbal section. You have a total of 4 sections, and the duration of the test is 3.5 hours, excluding the 2 8-minute breaks that you can take. Let's look at this analytical writing assessment section. As I mentioned, this is the only section in the GMAT where you're actually writing something. For all other sections, you'll be selecting one of the 4 or 5 answer choices that will be given to you. The scoring range for this section is 0 to 6, and it is in intervals of 0.5. Let's quickly look at what this section actually entails. You have to write an essay. Right. And what is this essay? This essay is about critiquing an argument. Right? You're going to analyze an argument. It's called analysis of an argument. You will critique an argument presented by an author. Typically, any argument will have certain facts or premises, and a conclusion will be drawn based on this. In the AWA section, the GMAT will present you with an argument where there is probably 1 or 2 gaping holes in the way the author has arrived at the conclusion. So what you are expected to do is basically find out what is the fallacy in reasoning or fallacies in reasoning made by the author, and write a simple essay critiquing that, right, which adheres to the rules of the standard rules of written English. Right? No fancy stuff. Usually an essay written for the AWA section will be about 300 to 350 words, not necessarily very long ones. Don't need to use any flowery language. How is this section scored? Scored on a range of 0 to 6, as I mentioned earlier, and in intervals of 0.5. From a preparation outlook point of view, the MBA.com, which is the official GMAT site, provides you with a list of questions or argument topics that are likely to be tested in the GMAT. Go through each one of those meticulously. Jot down points critiquing what is wrong with that argument. That is one part. Second thing, pick at least 10 of those essays and write an essay and check out for each of those 10. For about 30-40, you might basically jot down the points. For 10 of those 30, actually go and write the essay. Get at least 2 or 3 of your essays evaluated by a tutor and find out how you can improve upon this. Right. One important thing to keep in mind about this section, a good score in this section is 5 and above. So if you score a 5 or a 5.5 or a 6, that's competitive. A 5 in the AWA section of the GMAT over the years has been approximately 60 percentile, which is 40% of the people who have taken the GMAT have managed the score of 5 or 5.5 or 6. So if you are in this range, you are safe, and the B school is not going to take a second look at your AWA score. But if your score is below 4, which is likely to be below the 20th percentile, these schools might have serious reservations about offering you an admit because your written communication skills seem to be quite bad at that. So essentially keep your head above water, which is 5 and above in the AWA section. The next section is the integrated reasoning section. Last 30 minutes scored on a range of 1 to 8 and in intervals of 1. What does it contain? Contains 4 types of questions appear in this. All of these questions are objective type multiple choice questions. There are a total of 12 questions in this section. You will not be able to skip any question. So even if you do not know the answer, you'll have to mark something and only then will you be able to go to the next question. You will not be able to go back to a question and correct your response to it. So once you have confirmed the answer for, let's say, question 2, there's no way of going back to question 2. There are no partial credits for any question which has more than one part to it. For example, if a question asks you to find out 2 things, A and B, and the question number is, let's say, question number 3, unless you get both these parts A and B right, they're not going to give you credit for it. What are the 4 types of questions? First variant is called the graphic interpretation. The data is presented in pictorial form. Could be a pie chart, bar graph, line diagram, scatter diagram, anything. And questions 1 or 2 based on this. The second type is a tabular representation of data. Table analysis is what it's called. So based on the information provided in the table, you are expected to answer the questions that follow. One thing about the table given in the GMAT is if you click on the column head of each of the table, the software will sort these entire table in the ascending order of the column that you have decided to sort it on. The third type of question is what is known as multi-source reasoning or MSR. The title is reasonably clear about what it says. The source of data is more than one, multi-source. So it could be 2 or 3 graphs, a table, a graph and a paragraph, 2 paragraphs. So the data comes from more than one source. And the question that follows it, to answer that question or questions, you need to synthesize or process data from more than one of these sources. The last type of question is what is known as 2-part analysis. Each question has got a part A and a part B. And more often than not, both these parts are linked to each other. It would be something like this. If the information given in column A is true, then what can be inferred is what is given in column B. So provided A is true, only then can you infer B kind of a questions is what these are. For this part especially, unless you get both parts right, you won't get any credit. Partial credits are not given to this. Right? So these are the 4 sections that are there. It is not as if the questions are equally distributed among these 4 sections. And it is not even that they are come out, they'll be shown to you in the order in which I've given it to you. The first question could be a 2-part analysis, next could be a table analysis. They come in any jumbled order and it could vary from student to student. So already mentioned the scoring ranges 1 to 8. Anything over 5 is a good score in this. Pretty much similar to what we discussed in the AWA section. If you have a score which is above 5, 5, 6, 7, 8, I think your head is above water. Business schools will basically not take a second look at your score. But if your score is a 3 on 8, you'll have serious reservations about your ability to process and interpret data. So do adequate practice for this section. So the preparation outlook is, if you buy the official guide to the GMAT, it comes with a companion website, and the website has about 50 questions which are officially provided by the GMAT. Solve all of those 50. I think that's adequate preparation for this section. 6 to 8 is a great score in this. 3 and below are not good scores. So keep your head above water. Both the AWA and the integrated reasoning sections are not computer adaptive sections. So essentially the level of difficulty remains the same throughout the test for these 2 sections. At the end of this, you get to take an optional break of 8 minutes. I would seriously recommend that go ahead and take this break. It's not just a mentally taxing examination, it's physically taxing too. 3.5 hours to sit and stare at a screen and process something is difficult. So go stretch, have a glass of water or a drink, then come back. The next section is the quantitative reasoning section. It's for a duration of 1 hour 15 minutes. The scoring range is 0 to 60 and in intervals of 1. How many questions are there? There are a total of 37 questions. All of these are multiple choice questions. The duration, as I mentioned, is 1 hour and 15 minutes. About 2/3 of these questions are what are called as problem solving type. It's a typical math question, quant question, followed by 5 answer choices. You have to solve that and pick out which of these 5 answer choices is correct. There is only one choice which is correct for each of these questions. And the remaining 1/3 of the questions are of the form or the format called data sufficiency. A DS question is one where there is a question followed by 2 statements. What you need to figure out here is whether the information given in the 2 statements, the data given in these 2 statements is sufficient, is enough to answer this question. I've provided a video down the line which actually closely takes a look at a DS question and how to solve it, right? So for the time being, let's just hold that process here and move on to what this section is about. This section is a computer adaptive section. For example, let's say if you can classify questions on a scale of 1 to 5 in terms of their difficulty, 1 being the easiest, 3 being the median level of difficulty, and 5 being the toughest one. The first question shown to any test taker will be a level 3 median level difficulty question. The entire engine is programmed in such a way that if you get a question right, the engine is programmed to say that, hey, this person is competitive or competent at this level, and is programmed to give you a question which is of a higher level difficulty. So as you answer questions right, the next questions that you will be getting could be of a higher level difficulty. Higher level difficulty questions give you more points than lower level difficulty questions. The reverse is also true. If you answer questions incorrectly, as you do more and more mistakes in your questions, the software is programmed to understand that you are not comfortable or competent at that particular level. So it will start showing you questions which are of easier level of difficulty. Easier level questions obviously get lesser points. What is actually tested in the quantitative section? Basically, I can classify into 4 different areas. The first one is arithmetic, things like number properties, number theory, descriptive statistics, counting methods, permutation, combination, probability, right? Concepts like LCM, HCF, reminders, all these things are what get tested. Next is algebra. Algebra, I have equations, linear equation, quadratic equation, inequalities, functions, exponents, absolute values. These are what get tested. Usually in the DS variant, you'll find questions in inequalities, either with exponents or testing your concepts with absolute value. And these are actually quite interesting, or one could call it even tricky questions. The third area where you get questions is from geometry. Lines, angles, triangles, circles, quadrilaterals, coordinate geometry, and in solids, volume, surface area, these are the things that are tested. About 25% of the questions in the GMAT appear from the geometry area. And finally, word problems, things such as speed, distance, time, work problems, sets, mixtures, anything where the data is given to you in the form of a story or a sentence or a concept or whatever. You're expected to frame an equation from this and then solve it. So what is actually tested is your ability to transform information into equation and solve them. So these are the 4 broad areas that are tested. If I can give one umbrella way of saying what is the syllabus for the GMAT quant section, it would basically include anything from class 6 to class 10 math anywhere in the world. It could be the US, UK, India. These are the topics which are typically tested in the GMAT. Scoring range 0 to 60 in intervals of 1. The maximum score that anyone could get is a 51 in this section. What is a competitive score? The competitive score in this section is a 50 and above, which is 50 or 51 for Asian test takers. I would go ahead and say don't settle for anything less than 49. 49 in the test year 2015 for GMAT was 79th percentile, right? In the quant section, you need to have 80 percentile and above at least, right? So 49 is how low you could get. What is the outlook from a school's perspective? Schools would like their students to have a balanced score between the quant and the verbal section, right? So a very good school, the higher ranked schools will expect their students or the applicants to have a 90th percentile in the both these sections, the quant and the verbal. Whereas a lot of many good schools will expect you to have a balanced score which would be 80 percentile and above in each of these sections. If 20+% of the people manage a score of 49, 50 or 51 in the GMAT quant, then it is relatively easier. We'll check out how it works in the verbal section, but it is easier than the verbal section. Take it at this time. I'll show you the percentiles when we come to the verbal section. The flip side to the argument is if it is easy, then it becomes imperative that you actually score that 50 or 51, right? So if you are a student who is good at math and relatively not so good at verbal, my advice to you is try and keep your head above water in the verbal section. and max the quant section. So if you get a 50 or 51 in the quant, and if you have a relatively lower score but head above 80 percentile in the verbal section, I think you are safe home. You get to take another 8-minute break. Utilize this break too. Then we move on to the last section of the GMAT, which is the verbal reasoning section. Duration 1 hour 15 minutes. Scored on a range of 0 to 60. How many questions? 41 in number. All of these questions are multiple choice questions. Each question has got 5 choices and only one choice is correct. Duration is 75 minutes, as you have seen. This section is also a computer adaptive one. As mentioned in the quant section, here again, the level of difficulty increases as you keep answering questions right. And as you get questions wrong, the level of difficulty will go down. Let's quickly look at what kind of questions typically appear in the verbal section of the GMAT. First one, not necessarily the first one, first type of questions is the sentence correction. About a third of the questions that you will see in the verbal section of the GMAT are the sentence correction questions. A sentence is given to you, usually it's about a line length or about 2 to 3 lines length. A part of the sentence or the entire sentence is underlined. You need to pick from the 5 answer choices that follow that option which basically would replace this underlined component. If the original sentence is absolutely right, pick answer choice A, which is to say that the given sentence is right. If not, pick one of the remaining 4. Right. About another third of the questions are the reading comprehension type. Passages do not exceed 350 words. 2 to 4 questions follow this. Topics come from a wide range of subjects, right? And more often than not, what most test takers have said is the topics and the way the passages are written, they do not make for easy reading. The last third about the questions are basically called critical reasoning. Quite similar to what I mentioned about the argument presented in AWA. Critical reasoning questions are also about arguments, right? So you have to find out the logical validity of the argument. How do I strengthen the argument? How does one weaken the argument? These kinds of questions, right? These arguments are about 100 words in length. Again, the maximum score that one could get in this verbal section is 51. A 40 in the verbal section is the 91st percentile in test year 2015. A comparative score is about 36. So if you score a 36 and above, it's a good score to have. 40 and above is a phenomenal score to have in the verbal section. And try to have a balanced score. 80th percentile and above in both the verbal and the quant section will keep you in good stead. Preparation outlook is relatively tougher to score. Look at this. A 40 in the verbal section is 91st percentile, whereas you should have scored a 50 in the quant section to hit that kind of a number. The brighter side is if you have a 36 out of 50 or 51, that's again a very good score as far as the verbal section goes. So if you are one who's good at the verbal part than the quant part, I would suggest score a 49 in the quant and have a 44 in the verbal. That would keep you in good stead. Otherwise, try and aim for a 36 in the verbal section and have a 50 or 51 in the quant section. Of the 3 types of questions that appear, sentence correction, critical reasoning are extremely structured in the way you can prepare for them. Whereas reading comprehension is a little loosely defined. You have to read a passage. Passages come from a wide variety of topics. So widen the scope of your reading. Would definitely recommend taking an online subscription to magazines like scientificamerican.com, an American magazine. And there's one British magazine, Economist, which is also a good one to actually beef up your topics with. What actually counts towards your 800? Because everyone talks about my GMAT score is 720, 680, and it's all on 800. What are the sections that actually count towards it? What you score in the quant actually counts towards it. What you score in the verbal counts towards it. And the scoring range is between 200 and 800, and it goes in intervals of 10 points. 700 plus is a comparative score. What you score in the AWA and the integrated reasoning section do not count towards this 200 to 800. The scores in both those sections, 0 to 6 in AWA and 1 to 8 in IR, are presented as separate section scores.